What happens when one of the world's richest men disguises himself as someone struggling to get by, only to see how people truly treat those they believe are beneath them? Elon Musk's undercover experiment at a luxury hotel lounge revealed shocking truths about society, but also uncovered an unexpected act of kindness that changed a life forever. Elon Musk sat in his private study, momentarily detached from the relentless world of innovation and business. Amidst his usual whirlwind of high-stakes decisions and technological advancements, a thought had been gnawing at him. How often do people judge others based solely on appearance? More importantly, how would they treat him if they didn't know who he was? The question lingered, evolving into an idea he couldn't shake. Would people show kindness to a man they perceived as insignificant? That night, he formulated a plan. He would disguise himself as someone struggling to get by and walk into a place of wealth and exclusivity to observe human behavior firsthand. He chose the Silver Horizon, an elite hotel lounge in Miami, Florida, where business magnates and socialites gathered under chandeliers, sipping on expensive cocktails. It was the perfect setting, an environment where status meant everything. The transformation was meticulous. Elon swapped his tailored suits for second-hand clothes, scuffed sneakers, and an unkempt wig. A small makeup team added wrinkles and blemishes to his face, dulling the familiar sharpness that had graced magazine covers. Staring at his reflection, he barely recognized himself. For the first time in years, he felt what it meant to be invisible. Taking a deep breath, he stepped outside, heart pounding, ready to confront the truth of how the world saw those without wealth or power. As Elon Musk approached the Silver Horizon, the grand entrance loomed before him, its gilded doors gleaming under the warm Miami lights. He hesitated for a moment, taking in the sight of luxury cars pulling up, doormen in crisp uniforms greeting elite guests, and the steady murmur of wealth in motion. Squaring his shoulders, he stepped forward, pushing open the doors. Immediately, the shift in atmosphere was palpable. The scent of aged whiskey and expensive cologne filled the air, and the gentle hum of conversation blended seamlessly with the soft jazz playing in the background. The moment Elon crossed the threshold, a subtle ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Patrons, business moguls, celebrities, and Miami's elite glanced up briefly, their expressions flickering between curiosity and quiet disapproval, before returning to their conversations. However, the staff's reaction was more telling. Behind the host's stand, Oliver, the sharply dressed concierge, stiffened at the sight of him. His eyes darted over Elon's worn-out shoes, the creases in his thrifted blazer, and the way he stood. Not like someone meant to belong in a place like this. Composing himself, Oliver stepped forward with a polite yet restrained smile. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you?" His tone, while professional, carried an edge of skepticism. Elon nodded. "I'd like a seat." Oliver's practiced smile faltered, his gaze flickering toward the crowded lounge, noticing the empty tables yet choosing to ignore them. "I'm sorry, but the lounge is reserved for guests of the hotel," he said smoothly. From across the room, Nathan, the hotel manager, observed the exchange, arms crossed, already making silent assumptions about Elon's presence. Just as Oliver prepared to dismiss him completely, a voice interrupted. "I can serve him." The words came from Isabella, the bartender, who had been quietly watching. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice held a quiet determination. The lounge fell into a brief silence, and Elon turned toward her, sensing that in this sea of judgment he had found an unexpected lifeline. Elon settled onto a bar stool, the weight of disapproving glances pressing against him like an unspoken force. Around him the quiet murmur of conversation resumed, but the shift in energy was undeniable. He was an anomaly in a space meant for exclusivity. As he rested his hands on the polished marble counter, he noticed patrons stealing glances, their eyes flicking toward him with barely concealed discomfort. A well-dressed couple seated nearby exchanged whispers, the woman tilting her head toward her partner. "What is he even doing here?" she muttered. Her partner shrugged, his voice low but not low enough. "Probably looking for a handout. Just ignore him." Elon absorbed every reaction in silence, his mind cataloging the subtle yet unmistakable signs of exclusion. Across the bar, Oliver, the concierge, leaned toward Nathan, the hotel manager, speaking in hushed tones. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he assessed Elon from a distance. "Keep an eye on him," Nathan muttered. "I don't want him bothering the guests." At the bar, Isabella worked quickly, her movements efficient yet unhurried. Unlike the others, she didn't stare or avoid eye contact. Instead, she simply set a glass of water in front of him, her expression neutral, but not unkind. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said, her voice steady. Elon studied her carefully, sensing something different in her demeanor, not pity but decency, a rare willingness to acknowledge him as a person rather than a problem. He nodded in quiet gratitude. Nearby, a server whispered loudly to a colleague, "Seriously, why is she serving him?" The other scoffed. "I don't know, but management needs to step in before he scares off the real customers." Elon took a slow sip of water, letting their words settle. He had expected this: judgment, exclusion, the quiet yet powerful rejection of those who didn't fit into society's unspoken rules. But among the cold stares and whispered dismissals, Isabella's small act of respect stood out like a beacon. He had found what he was looking for: the truth about how people treat those they perceive as insignificant. Isabella moved behind the bar with quiet efficiency, pretending not to notice the hushed conversations and subtle gestures aimed at the man in front of her. She could feel the weight of judgment in the room, the way her coworkers exchanged pointed looks, silently questioning why she was wasting time on him, but to her he was just another customer, and that was all that mattered. With practiced ease, she reached for a clean glass and poured Elon a drink, setting it in front of him without hesitation. "On the house," she said, her tone light but firm. Elon lifted his gaze to hers, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." She shrugged. "I know." The simplicity of her kindness stood in stark contrast to the atmosphere around them. A few feet away, Oliver exhaled sharply, shaking his head in disbelief, while Nathan watched with barely disguised irritation. A nearby patron, a middle-aged businessman with a Rolex glinting on his wrist, let out a small scoff and leaned toward his dining companion. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "They're just encouraging him to stay." Another guest, a woman in an elegant emerald dress, swirled her wineglass absently. "Honestly, what if he tries to ask for money?" Elon heard it all, every whispered assumption, every dismissive remark. But he also noticed the way Isabella ignored them, her focus never wavering as she continued her work. There was no hesitation in her actions, no second guessing, just an instinctive choice to treat him like anyone else. Nathan finally stepped forward, his patience wearing thin. "Isabella," he called out, voice clipped. "A word." She turned, meeting his sharp gaze. "Yes?" Nathan's voice dropped, but not low enough that Elon couldn't hear. "We have a certain standard to maintain. Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere." She didn't flinch. "And serving someone a drink disrupts that?" Nathan clenched his jaw, glancing toward Elon with barely concealed disdain. "You know exactly what I mean." But Isabella only smiled faintly. "I do, and I still don't see the problem." For the first time that evening, Elon felt something more than judgment. He felt defiance. In a room full of people who had already decided his worth, one person had chosen to see him differently, and that, he realized, was more powerful than anything else. The tension in the silver horizon had been simmering just beneath the surface, but now it boiled over. As Isabella returned to the bar, ignoring Nathan's pointed look, a businessman in a navy-tailored suit seated a few tables away exhaled loudly in frustration. He set down his glass of bourbon with a sharp clink and turned to his dinner companion. "I can't believe they're allowing this," he muttered, voice laced with disdain. "This isn't a shelter, it's a luxury lounge. People pay good money to be here." His companion, a woman in an emerald green dress, nodded in agreement. "They should just ask him to leave. It's uncomfortable." Their conversation wasn't meant to be overheard, but Elon caught every word. He didn't react. He had spent years developing a thick skin, but what struck him wasn't their words alone. It was the collective silence of the room, the way nobody challenged them. Every judgmental glance, every whisper of discomfort, was an unspoken confirmation that he didn't belong. Nathan had heard enough. Straightening his tie, he strode toward the bar, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Elon turned his gaze toward him, meeting his eyes steadily. "I'm just sitting here. I haven't caused any trouble." Nathan gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that masked irritation behind forced politeness. "This establishment has a certain standard, and unfortunately we can't accommodate everyone." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Around them, guests pretended not to listen, though their curiosity was palpable. Some watched with thinly veiled amusement, as though waiting to see a spectacle unfold. Isabella, still behind the bar, froze mid-motion, gripping the rag in her hand tightly. "He hasn't done anything wrong," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Nathan turned to her, his expression hard. "This isn't about what he's done. It's about the atmosphere we provide." A tense silence stretched between them, and then, as if to drive the final nail into the coffin, the businessman from earlier reached into his pocket and tossed a few crumpled dollar bills onto the bar in front of Elon. "Here," he sneered, "since you clearly need it." A few guests chuckled, others merely looked away. For the first time, Elon felt the weight of true rejection, not as a billionaire, not as a public figure, but as a man perceived to be beneath the worth of those around him. And still, he said nothing, because the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. A heavy silence hung in the air, thick with the weight of judgment. The crumpled bills still sat on the polished bar top, a stark symbol of the condescension and cruelty Elon had just witnessed. For a long moment he remained seated, his fingers lightly tracing the rim of his glass. Nobody expected him to push back. They had already decided what kind of person he was, someone to be ignored, dismissed, and cast aside. Then, slowly, deliberately, Elon stood. The movement alone was enough to draw the full attention of the room. Conversations stilled, glasses paused mid-air, and Nathan's expression flickered with annoyance, as if preparing to physically escort him out. Even Isabella watched with curiosity, sensing something was about to shift. Elon reached up to his head, fingers slipping beneath the unkempt wig. With a smooth motion he pulled it off. Gasps rippled through the lounge. A server dropped a tray, the clatter of glass breaking against the floor, punctuating the moment. The face beneath the disguise was instantly recognizable. Elon Musk. The name itself carried weight, a billionaire, a visionary, a man whose face had been printed on magazine covers and television screens across the world. People had looked at him countless times before, but never like this. Now, they weren't just seeing Elon Musk. They were seeing their own actions reflected back at them. Nathan's smug composure collapsed in an instant, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. The businessman who had thrown money at Elon looked as though he had been struck, his face draining of color. Elon took a step forward, surveying the room, letting the moment stretch. "I came here tonight to see how people treat someone they believe to be beneath them," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "And what I saw was judgment, whispers, rejection." Nobody spoke. Then, Elon's gaze landed on Isabella. But one person chose kindness. She stiffened as the entire room turned to look at her. A deep flush rose to her cheeks, but she held her ground. "You didn't know who I was," Elon continued, his expression softening, "but you treated me with respect anyway. That's the kind of person who deserves to be recognized." The room, once so confident in its assumptions, now sat in stunned silence. The weight of Elon's words hung in the air, pressing down on every guest and staff member who had whispered, judged, or dismissed him. No one dared to speak. Even Nathan, once so certain in his authority, stood frozen, his usual confidence replaced by uneasy silence. Elon turned back to Isabella, his expression one of quiet admiration. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small envelope and extended it toward her. "This is for you," he said simply. Hesitantly, Isabella took it, her hands slightly trembling, As she opened the flap and pulled out the contents, her eyes widened in shock. Inside was a handwritten note, a message of gratitude, and a check for $50,000. The entire room gasped in disbelief. Isabella's lips parted, but for a moment no words came. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was just doing my job." Elon shook his head, his gaze steady. "No, you went beyond that. You chose to see a person, not an appearance." The guests who had once viewed Isabella with disdain for serving Elon now looked at her with something close to admiration and guilt. Elon turned back to the room, his eyes scanning the now silent crowd. "For those of you who judged me tonight, let this be a lesson. Appearances are deceiving. The way you treat others reveals more about you than it does about them." Nathan swallowed hard, unable to meet Elon's gaze. The businessman who had tossed money at him now looked deeply ashamed. Elon turned to leave, but before stepping away, he met Isabella's eyes one last time. "Never lose that kindness. It's rare, and it's powerful." In the days that followed, news of Elon Musk's social experiment spread like wildfire. Headlines across social media and major news outlets told the story of how one of the world's richest men had exposed society's judgmental nature in a single night. Articles ranged from "Billionaire puts humanity to the test in luxury hotel" to "Elon Musk rewards bartender for kindness in unexpected experiment." People debated the incident online, some defending the guests' reactions while others criticized the way society treats those who appear less fortunate. Meanwhile, the Silver Horizon faced its own reckoning. Customers left scathing reviews, calling out the hotel's lack of compassion. In response, management scrambled to implement new staff training programs emphasizing respect and inclusivity, though some suspected it was merely a public relations move. For Isabella, life changed overnight. With the $50,000 check, she finally enrolled in culinary school, a dream she had once believed was out of reach. Interview requests poured in, but when asked about that night, her answer remained simple. It was never about knowing who he was. It was about treating someone with dignity. And that's something we should all do, whether they're a billionaire or not. Elon, reflecting on the experience, summed it up best in a later interview. "Kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about the choices we make every single day." The story of Elon Musk's social experiment serves as a powerful reminder that true character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in how we treat those we perceive as unimportant. The night at the Silver Horizon exposed a harsh reality. Many people judge others based on appearance rather than humanity. The wealthy patrons, the hotel staff, and even the manager were quick to assume Elon was someone undeserving of respect, simply because he did not fit their image of success. Their whispers, dismissive glances, and outright rejection reflected a societal flaw. We are often kinder to status than to people. Yet, amidst the judgment, one person stood out: Isabella. Without knowing who he was, she chose kindness over conformity, respect over indifference. Her simple act of serving Elon a drink with dignity became a lesson in humanity. Kindness does not require wealth, status, or recognition. It requires choice. In the end, Elon's experiment wasn't about punishing the unkind, but about revealing the truth. How we treat those with nothing says more about us than them. True kindness isn't performative. It's a quiet, everyday decision that holds the power to change lives.